You're under arrest. You're gonna have to take me!
You see, your mama is a drugged out hoe. She been since I know her. That's how you got here, nigga.
Hollywood is pretty white. I don't think that really needs too much further elaboration. Whether it be Hollywood, music, gaming, hell, even the comic book industry, there is a wide variety of racial disparities found in these entertainment mediums. Disparities that, as a result, tend to marginalize the minority communities within them. With Hollywood specifically, this has been the case since its inception. Minority filmmakers, particularly black filmmakers, oftentimes are not allowed to tell their raw, unfiltered stories without the lens of racism or respectability politics getting in the way, which is why whenever one of us tends to get in the director's chair, we tend to make films that closely resonate with our identity. One, because it's one of the few chances to tell our stories, but because we also very well may never get that chance again. While there have been many attempts to create our own spaces free of these perils, they usually fail, either imploding due to financial and political constraints or due to their narratives slowly becoming co-opted over time. But there was a time in which we came close. A time in which we spawned a filmmaking movement and subculture that not only told stories by us, but were self-funded and controlled by us. This movement was Blaxploitation.
Dance, motherfucker, dance!
What the hell you want with me? Please go be asking why you threw that son of a bitch out the window.
You don't give me my money till that.
Blaxploitation was a lot. Look, whether you're one of the people like me who have a guilty pleasure with these movies, or one of the people that hate these movies for some very legitimate and valid reasons, you have to admit one thing. Blaxploitation was a cultural phenomenon that cemented many milestones for black filmmaking and created many conditions that, if properly attended to a little differently in retrospect, could have potentially created a powerhouse of opportunities for black filmmakers. But we all know how history treats revolutionary movements. They get snuffed out, or worse, co-opted. It didn't take long for Hollywood to completely co-opt what the Blaxploitation movement was. A movement spearheaded by black filmmakers in an attempt to make black cinema more mainstream, and turning it into this.
What happened to my $100, Joe? Nigga, did you take my money?
That's right, little bitch. I took it back. You ain't worth no $100.
By the time the mid to late 70s came around, Blaxploitation was less of a movement and had become more of a genre that was buried in controversy. Many people, including those today and back then, felt like it was nothing more than a cheap, racist, performative effort to lure in the dollars of black moviegoers. Others argue that the Blaxploitation era of cinema created a norm that's still prevalent in 21st century black storytellers today, that being that black stories are synonymous with black trauma. Because it's not until recently that we've begun to unpack the generationality of how racial trauma is reflected on screen, we have to ask ourselves, how is it affecting us today? Or better yet, what's different?
At the end of the day, Ronnie, I am a man. A man who's gay. You like niggas, get that through your head.
Tubi movies are truly a thing of their own. I mean, we all love to make fun of them. Hell, even I've made fun of Tubi movies before. But I feel like doing just that would be a disservice not only to the platform, but to all of the filmmakers on it if I didn't dig a little deeper. I mean, what are we laughing at? Why do we find these kinds of movies so bad? Why do they continue to be made, even if we consider them to be so bad? When examining the stark parallels between Tubi movies created by black creators and those of the Blaxploitation era, it's easy to see how it had the same opportunities as well as suffers from the same pitfalls. Tubi has allowed for a variety of black creatives and filmmakers to broadcast their stories to a much wider audience. However, simultaneously, it has found itself slowly co-opted by the racist narratives found within media. But what if we could change that? What if, using our knowledge of how to navigate our modern media environment, what if we created a new movement within Tubi? A new movement for black filmmakers that learned its lesson from the previous movements? What if we, as filmmakers, triggered a Tubi Renaissance?
Wait. What do you want to go and do this for? Why?
I'm sure there are some of you watching this video that have no idea what the hell Blaxploitation even is. You probably saw Tubi movies in the thumbnail and title and thought this nigga's finna go on an extended rant about how bad black Tubi movies are, which, I mean, I will do a little bit of, but not to the extent that you think. I feel like a lot of people do take cheap and easy digs at Tubi movies, but not for the right reasons. I mean, yeah, I could spend 20 plus minutes talking about how the quality of an indie film is not Hollywood level, but that would be a huge disservice to not only those filmmakers, but to you all as well, because these are not Hollywood movies. These are independently produced films made by much smaller studios and creators. They're using Tubi as a platform because it allows them to have access. I'm not gonna make fun of a nigga for using a broom as a tripod because he couldn't afford a real one. You do what you gotta do. What I am gonna take a dig at is the minstrelsy and anti-blackness that these films perpetuate in the process of trying to make their films. Why is it that Tubi movies, specifically black Tubi movies, have to look like this and gain their popularity? Why is it that they have the stigma that's associated with them? Why is it that in a space where creators are literally able to put out entire films, we're still not able to control our own narrative? Or are we? These are the questions this video is trying to ask. Some of them might be answered, whereas others may take more discussion. Regardless, in order to do that, we still need to add all the necessary context. And what better way to do that than some animated history?
The Black Prince of Darkness, Blackula.
In order to truly do a topic like this justice, I think we need to go over not only a comprehensive history of how the movement came to be, but how it achieved success so quickly. While Blaxploitation movies may have taken the nation by storm in the 1970s, there was a unique set of conditions that allowed for this genre to be born in the first place. Let's jump back about 10 years. The 1960s were not only a turbulent time for race relations in America, but for Hollywood as well. Color television had finally become more popular amongst American households, which offered a variety of new programs and opportunities to be broadcasted. On top of this, what was considered Hollywood's golden age had just ended, and large studios and production companies were either taking massive financial losses or beginning to shut down altogether. This created a panic within Hollywood as studios began to desperately look for new ways to bring in moviegoers. Naturally, Hollywood did what it always does: make movies capitalizing off of society's issues. And considering this was the late 1960s, surely they didn't have too much trouble finding that. The general consensus was to begin making films from the perspectives of marginalized communities, with a heavy emphasis on crime, poverty, and anti-heroes. However, this was in no way a form of empowerment. Instead, it was solely for profit. Hollywood was less concerned with the people in the stories they were telling and more concerned with how many people would be driven back into the movie theater. It was a surefire plan: watch society crumble while making movies about society crumbling. However, Hollywood wasn't the only one to see this as an opportunity. Many filmmakers saw this shakeup in Hollywood as a chance to finally begin broadcasting black stories to a much larger audience, an opportunity that to this point had been almost non-existent. Before 1970, African Americans on screen were very rarely positively portrayed within Hollywood, typically given roles portraying racist caricatures like servants or nonsensical comic relief. Stephen Fletcher is a prime example of this, who has been well documented throughout film history. While filmmakers such as Oscar Micheaux were already making films with large black cast, his work was pretty divorced and outside of mainstream Hollywood. There have been practically little to no self-produced and financed black films created within the Hollywood system. And then Sweetback happened. This is Melvin Van Peebles. In 1971, Peebles released a film titled Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, a film in which he wrote, directed, produced, edited, and starred in. The film is a gritty and raw tale of a poor, down-on-his-luck black man running for his life from racist white authorities. Peoples got the idea for this film while working on his film that was released a year earlier, Watermelon Man. Only this time, Peoples wanted to make a film that was less satirical of white liberals and instead something more direct. And I don't know about you, but that's a little pretty direct to me. It was pretty direct to black audiences as well, who were astonished by the film, particularly with its depiction of a black man not only fighting back against the system, but actually winning in the end. Before Sweetback, there had never been a film in which a black man running from the police got away, and so the film made such a justifiable splash within the black community. Naturally so that black creators and filmmakers would want to see more of this type of content. And it struck such a massive chord amongst black moviegoers that we saw a massive turn and surge in interest and demand for more films like it. Within months, Hollywood caught on and began to produce films that were very similar. Films such as Shaft, Superfly, The Mac, Dolomite, Foxy Brown, Coffee, Black Caesar, all sharing similar themes of no-nonsense, smooth-talking, badass protagonists that had no problem sticking up to the man. As a result, the Blaxploitation genre was born. And then black people finally got their own space on screen and everyone got to make their own stories and we all lived happily ever after. All jokes aside, the movement died just as quickly as it was born, and that's because we never had any control over any of it. While Blaxploitation did give many filmmakers and actors a chance to jumpstart their careers, they were at the mercy of the sinister entities that pulled the strings behind the scenes, and these sinister entities were the Hollywood system. Let's not forget, Hollywood is by default a capitalist entity. It's a system and network of multi-billion-dollar corporations that fund and produce films for the sole sake of making money. The money will always come first. The art is just secondary. So when Hollywood sees a new trend that everyone is rushing and running towards, they're gonna jump on that bandwagon. And since they're the ones controlling how the dollars are flowing in, they're in control of the narrative. There's a reason it's retroactively referred to as Blaxploitation. These films became the direct result of Hollywood attempting to exploit the fact that black audiences wanted their own movies on screen. The original pioneers of this movement made movies that were directly protesting the racist injustices of the Hollywood system, a system that had wronged us since it was first created. Films like Sweet Sweetback, Watermelon Man, and The Spook That Sat by the Door were independently made passion projects that spoke out against the societal injustices of Hollywood at the time. However, once Hollywood got their hands on it, all that mattered was the money. They knew that the racist caricatures and inner city stereotypes would generate money, so they pumped them out en masse. We went from the racist minstrel caricatures of Sambo from the 1930s and 40s on screen to a contemporary minstrel show, just replacing Sambo with pimps and pushers. Not at all reflective of what inner city life was actually like for many black Americans during the time. But we kept giving them our dollars. We either were so blinded by the fact that we finally got movies that starred and featured us that we ignored many of the racism portrayed in it, or we didn't care. And that's not to downplay the many individuals who spoke out against it back when it was still popular. There were many scholars, writers, activists, actors, and filmmakers alike who were all in protest of the direction Hollywood was taking the movement in. They saw how it was becoming a shallow parody of itself, not to mention how it treated many of the actors. A lot of these actors soon found their careers stunted by these movies, unable to find roles outside of that specific subgenre of film. While this can also be attributed to the racism of Hollywood not granting upward mobility to minority actors, Blaxploitation definitely did play a role in reinforcing this. In the span of less than a decade, we saw a movement that was spearheaded by black creatives to tell our stories, to a contemporary vampiric minstrel show that put out anything and everything just to steal our dollars. And it worked. But that's not the scary part. While it may be easy to critique Blaxploitation from the 1970s, we're not really out of the woods. That's because Blaxploitation never went away. It just evolved.
Look, Shonda, why did you go back to those people again on me for more money? You know I already give Raven everything that she needs, everything that she wants. That's how you playing it?
Now you wait a minute, Mike. You better be glad I stopped there. I should have put your white ass on child support. All that money she making. Don't you come for me unless I send for you. You got that? I tell you what, I'll see your ass in court again. Think you gonna take this? Not no more.
Well, here we are. Let's talk about Tubi now. As much as I love it when my people finally get a chance to tell our stories on screen, when it comes to Tubi, we're kind of doing exactly what they want us to do. And it's only going to get much worse if we don't tackle and do something about it. I want to reiterate now, before niggas flood the comments saying that I hate black people having fun, or I'm defending respectability politics, or I'm policing other people's blackness. Let me just say that none of that is true. As much as I think a lot of this content is harmful to an extent, it doesn't really need to go away completely. Contrary to what some of you may think, I like silly shit. I like a little bit of nonsensical ignorance, and because, well, black people aren't a monolith, there's gonna be individuals who still resonate with these films. I'm more than willing to recognize when something isn't for me and move on, but this is more than that. What I'm saying is, we can't let this be the forefront of what independent black cinema is. While Tubi as a platform has existed since 2014, it wasn't a popular platform for black filmmakers until 2020. Not only was this the year the platform would be acquired by the Fox Corporation, but also, let's not forget where we were as a community.
And my black women being shot, being killed by the NYPD.
2020 saw the numerous racial uprisings following the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others, which were a boiling point for over 2 centuries worth of racist policing in the United States. These uprisings highlighted our frustrations with this nation. Combine this with a global pandemic, it's no surprise that black filmmakers would be fed up with a nation that doesn't care about us, and would instead start making their own content. But we're leaving one thing out. Even while this was happening, we were actively being co-opted. From black squares on Instagram to congressmen in kente cloth, the establishment saw how profitable black suffering, frustration, and strife was, so they capitalized off of it. Entertainment brands such as Netflix started their Black Lives Matter collection. Aunt Jemima became a beacon of hope and change. Shaun King happened. It's how calls for defunding the police ended up with a Black Lives Matter sidewalk and more police funding. Any meaningful efforts to combat these injustices and enact real change were co-opted and hijacked by the establishment for economic and political reasons, repackaged and kicked down the road. You may be wondering, what does this have to do with Tubi? Well, let's take a look at what's been Tubi's response to these frustrations. Tubi, naturally seeing there's an influx of black filmmakers making and releasing content on the platform, has decided to promote these films, allowing them to trend and reach wider audiences. But there's a catch. They're only promoting black Tubi movies that fit a certain narrative. When you think about black Tubi movies, what comes to mind? Can't describe it? That's okay. We'll go over the plot of some of a few. We'll start with PPP Loan Gone. The film is about a man who is caught up in his friend's fraudulent schemes and PPP loan scams, ripe with stereotypes about black folks and everything. Or let's try Sloppy Seconds, a film about a sheltered woman who meets a man only for her to become the victim of his physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Only the movie doesn't really make an argument regarding any of it. It kind of just blasted on the screen for over an hour. I couldn't even show clips of it without this video being flagged. That's just how obscene it is. And there's plenty more, don't worry. If you go into Tubi and type in black Tubi movies, these are the first types of films that you're greeted with. Movies that are basically just walking negative stereotypes about us. There's a specific reason why I'm not calling black Tubi movies hood movies for the most part. I want to abstain from calling these hood movies because they're not really hood movies. Hood movies have always been vessels to tell stories about us that the mainstream media tries to avoid. They shine a light on struggles that we go through and produce some really thought-provoking stories as a result. Think John Singleton and the Hughes brothers as perfect examples of this. However, Tubi movies are not this. They're not pushing back against any harmful mainstream narrative, nor are they trying to shine a light. Instead, they're playing right into their hands. As we mentioned before, Tubi isn't owned by us. It's owned by Fox. They know that harmful stereotypes are profitable as well as a massive political advantage to them. So why wouldn't they push out the harmful content that promotes these narratives? Looking back at it, a lot of these movies remind me of those really bad, old, horrible King Batch vines that were really, really racist, and I think were more so enjoyed by white people making fun of us rather than us laughing at ourselves. While I don't want to shift the blame entirely on either the filmmakers or the company, we have to understand that it's both intentional and intertwined within each other. These companies know what they're doing. We have to be smart enough not to fall for the trap. The rat only falls for the trap because it doesn't understand why the cheese is free. But that raises a question. What about it? Or rather, what now? What do we do to push back against this? How do we combat the anti-blackness that's being pushed by these platforms? And how do we simultaneously deter our own communities from falling into these traps? It's a little more complex than that, but there is an option. A little radical, a little extreme, but if we all pull together our resources, it can be done.
How long has it been in your head? And man, you don't do nothing overnight. You know, I am your partner. You could have told me.
Let's go back to 1971. We talked about how Melvin Van Peebles changed the game overnight with Sweet Sweetback and how he had the full support of the community behind him. The problem with that was Hollywood was still in control of distribution and funding, and thus were able to hijack and effectively kill the movement in its tracks. Tubi, however, is in a different position. Tubi films, for the most part, are divorced from the Hollywood system. Most of the films you see made pretty much are independently funded and produced. Tubi is just a distributor. Typically in Hollywood, there's an excruciating pitch process that involves being greenlit and acquiring funding from studios. But filmmakers on Tubi have the luxury of avoiding that process for the most part. As long as they have the means to independently fund and produce the films, they can essentially distribute them for relatively cheap or nothing at all. That being said, why not repeat the initial stages of the Blaxploitation movement, only this time with us in control of the money? Why not trigger the Tubi Renaissance? I'll never forget watching both Moonlight and Killer of Sheep for the first time. Two very artistically driven passion projects that speak on both the struggle and beauty of the numerous black experiences that many of us have to face on a daily basis. While Moonlight is a Hollywood film, Killer of Sheep is independent. Despite this, Charles Burnett, the director, had many influences on black filmmakers, including myself. Difference between now and the 80s when the film first came out is much more accessible to create a movie nowadays. Digital cameras and compact equipment have made it much easier. It's less cumbersome and much more affordable. The tools, both production and distribution-wise, are essentially at our disposal. With that being said, why not make the films we want to see? There was a trending topic of controversy on Twitter a few months ago in which a number of black TV shows were canceled. This led to many complaining that they wouldn't get canceled if we simply watched them more and supported them, which is not entirely true. Hollywood at the end of the day is going to control any narrative they see fit when it comes to black issues. We can watch these films and shows all we want, and they'll still be at the mercy of Hollywood, which is why we need to take those matters essentially into our own hands. We've been given a platform that essentially costs little to nothing to release and distribute our own films. That artsy, experimental, thought-provoking, unapologetically black film you always wanted to see, there's nothing stopping us from putting it on Tubi. We need to eradicate the stigma of Tubi movies being "we have Tyler Perry at home" and embrace it for what it truly could be, a gold mine for producing films that Hollywood refuses to show us. By taking advantage of this and pushing these current types of films out of the spotlight, we're able to retake control of our own narrative and make that thought-provoking, groundbreaking content that we want to see. I recently started watching Borders, a Tubi original about a group of black students at a very privileged and prestigious school. It's quirky, funny, while at the same time dealing with some heavy themes and content. While I'm not sure if this is completely independently produced, after all it does claim to be a Tubi original series, at the same time it is still pushing its own narrative. And it still does do what I've been talking about in terms of retaking control of that narrative. We don't have to put up with the constant minstrelsy and instead can produce content that we want to see. The current trend of black Tubi movies isn't going anywhere, even if we do push it out of the spotlight. And it doesn't need to completely disappear. They can still stay, but it definitely doesn't need to be the center and in the spotlight. But how do we do that? First things first, we gotta stop being so elitist when it comes to a lot of these projects. In the process of trying to rightfully criticize some of these films, we have a tendency to judge the production qualities of independent films a little too harshly. I said this before and I'll say it again. Indie films are not going to look like Hollywood productions. Making a movie is not easy, and it really hurts to pour your soul into a piece of art just to have someone shit on it because it doesn't look like it had a multi-million-dollar budget. We can critique a film's content and the narrative that it's pushing without hating on how it looks. Secondly, we need to make it abundantly clear to Tubi that this is not the type of content that we want front and center. Tubi sees the memes and jokes that we make about the movies and has their algorithms continually recommending them to us because they know we'll talk about them in the end. It generates money from this controversy and racism that it pushes out on screen. But if we make it abundantly clear to them that we want something else, they'll have no choice but to produce and push out the content that we've made, or risk losing money in the long run. That being said, this is not an easy task at all. We're talking about collectively organizing, coming together, and dismantling the current way that the media tries to portray blackness and replacing it with something new. We all know how scared America can get whenever black people actually try to organize. It's not easy, but the ball is in our court. I have an assignment for you watching this. You didn't think this was going to be an interactive video, did you? I want you to think of that black creative friend that you know. I know you know one. We all do. Go talk to them. Ask them what kind of movies they like and want to see, and why we're not currently getting it. Then I want you to ask them what's stopping them from picking up the camera, picking up the keyboard, or picking up the pen, and writing and producing or developing it. Show them this video if you have to. It's time we stop letting the corporate entities play in our faces, pretending to promote our well-being when all they want is a check at the end of the day. It's time we showed them how powerful and beautiful black cinema truly can be.
You better take good care of me. Nothing better happen to one hair on my gorgeous head. Can you dig it?